It started with the sound of engines. Not just any engines. Deep, rumbling, metallic growls that vibrated through the walls of my home like a storm rolling in from somewhere far away. It was a Saturday afternoon in Maple Grove Estates, and my wife, Elena, 34, was in the kitchen slicing vegetables for lunch. She stopped mid-cut, knife hovering over the cutting board, her eyes darting toward the window. The sound grew louder, heavier, more deliberate. I stepped out onto the porch just as 3 massive motorcycles turned into my driveway, their chrome glinting under the sun. The men riding them looked like they'd been pulled straight out of a gangland movie, leather vests, tattoos crawling up their necks, and eyes that locked onto me with a predatory stillness. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his left cheek, killed his engine and dismounted. He didn't smile. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, then at my house, then back at me again, like he was sizing up his prey. Behind me, I could feel Elena watching from the doorway, her breathing shallow. She whispered my name, David, in that voice people use when they're afraid something terrible is about to happen. Afternoon, the scar-faced man finally said, his voice low, deliberate. We need to talk. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let my eyes drift to the HOA's main office across the street, where, through the blinds, I could make out the silhouette of Ellen Porter, 52, our Homeowners Association president, watching everything unfold. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She wanted me to see her watching. That's when I understood. This wasn't a random visit. This wasn't about motorcycles. This was about the letter I'd sent last week, the one where I told the HOA they were overstepping, where I refused to pay the ridiculous, unsanctioned vehicle fine they slapped on me for parking my classic pickup in my own driveway. And now, they'd send enforcers. I took a slow step toward the man with the scar. You from the HOA? He smirked, just slightly. Let's just say Ellen doesn't like it when people think the rules don't apply to them. She asked us to explain that to you. From the doorway, Elena's voice trembled. David, just go inside. But I didn't move. I looked at these men, then back at Ellen's shadow in the office window, and a question started burning in my mind. How far would I go to protect my home and my wife from people who thought fear was a negotiation tactic? Because make no mistake, this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about control. Welcome to FenceLine Story. Mention where you're watching this video from. Like and subscribe for more videos like this. Scarface took a step closer, closing the gap between us until I could smell the cigarette smoke on his jacket. You've got until tomorrow morning to pay that fine. And if you think ignoring us is an option, his eyes flicked toward Elena. Think again. That was the moment everything slowed down for me. The motorcycles idling behind him felt like the ticking of some invisible clock. Elena's hand, white-knuckled on the doorframe. Ellen's silhouette behind the blinds. I'd dealt with HOA nonsense before. Overgrown grass notices. Complaints about holiday lights. Pet registration fees. But this was something darker. Something that had no place in a neighborhood where kids played in sprinklers and people waved at each other over picket fences. I thought about the neighbors who'd moved away quietly after problems with the HOA. I thought about the rumors, driveways vandalized, mail stolen, cars keyed after disputes with the board. I dismissed them as paranoid gossip. But now, with 3 bikers in my driveway, I wasn't so sure. I didn't answer his ultimatum. I just said one thing. You're making a mistake. His smirk returned, wider this time. The mistake, he said, is thinking you can win against us. They revved their engines again, loud enough to rattle the windows, and rolled back toward the street. But not before Scarface leaned toward me and muttered, "Tomorrow morning." As they pulled away, I saw Ellen close her blinds. Elena stepped out beside me, her voice shaking. David, what are you going to do? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't fully know. All I knew was that the HOA had crossed a line, one I could never let them cross again. And as I stood there in my driveway, watching the dust settle from their tires, a single thought carved itself into my mind like stone. They think fear is power. They have no idea what real power looks like. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the 3 motorcycles sitting in my driveway. I saw Scarface smirk, heard the low growl of their engines, and felt the weight of his words, tomorrow morning. Elena lay beside me, restless. Around midnight, she whispered, David, I don't feel safe here anymore. That cut deeper than I expected. This was our home. We'd saved for years to move into Maple Grove Estates, a neighborhood that looked perfect on the outside. Freshly painted houses, manicured lawns, friendly waves from neighbors walking their dogs. The HOA brochure had called it a community built on harmony. But I knew now that harmony had a price, and Ellen Porter was the one collecting it. I first clashed with Ellen 6 months ago over something small. I'd parked my 1972 Ford F-100, a classic pickup I'd been restoring for years, in my driveway instead of the garage. That night, a bright orange violation notice appeared on my door. Unapproved vehicle storage. Fine, $150. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I called Ellen directly. "David," she said in that syrupy, passive-aggressive tone she'd perfected, "we have rules for a reason. That truck is not in keeping with the aesthetic of the neighborhood." I told her it was temporary, that I was working on the garage. She told me the board had voted, and there were no exceptions. That was my first lesson about Maple Grove Estates. The rules aren't about order. They're about control. I paid the fine, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want trouble. But trouble found me anyway. The next month, another notice arrived. Exterior lighting violation. Fine, $100. Apparently, the warm white bulbs I'd strung on our porch didn't match the HOA-approved cool white standard. Then came lawn maintenance warning. My grass was slightly over regulation height. Holiday decor breach. Our Halloween display was excessive. It became clear I was on Ellen's radar. And once you were there, every little thing became a problem. I wasn't the only one. My neighbor Tommy Harris, 42, a quiet guy who kept to himself, told me over beers one night that Ellen had fined him for leaving his recycling bin out too long after collection day. "She wants everyone scared," Tommy said. "Keeps people in line. You pay the fines, you keep your head down, and you hope she moves on to someone else." But sometimes she didn't move on. 6 months ago, Sandra Miller, 39, a single mom down the street, had a dispute over repainting her fence. She refused to use the HOA-approved paint color because it cost triple the store brand. 2 weeks later, someone keyed her car. Then her mailbox was smashed. She filed a police report, but nothing came of it. Sandra moved out within a month. So when I refused to pay the most recent fine for my truck, $500 this time, Ellen decided to make an example out of me. At first, it was the usual harassment. HOA board members dropping by to inspect my property without notice. Random anonymous complaints filed about noise, even when we weren't home. A letter threatening legal action for failure to comply. I ignored them. That was my mistake. Because the next step was intimidation. It wasn't until later that I found out who the bikers were. They called themselves the Ridge Riders, a local motorcycle club, mostly harmless on their own. But Ellen's nephew, Mark Porter, 38, was their vice president. She had influence over them. And when she wanted to send a message, she knew exactly who to call. This wasn't the HOA acting in an official capacity. This was personal. This was Ellen using her position to weaponize fear. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this had nothing to do with my truck. That was just the excuse. Ellen had a pattern. Identify a homeowner who pushes back. Overwhelm them with fines and violations. If they still resist, make them uncomfortable enough to leave. And once they left, the HOA could enforce restoration, work on the property, rack up more fines, and eventually seize it through liens. I'd heard whispers of the board flipping those houses for a profit under community improvement projects. It sounded like conspiracy talk until I saw the paperwork Tommy showed me. 3 houses in the past 2 years, all owned by people who had fought the HOA, all foreclosed and resold to relatives or close friends of board members. Maple Grove Estates wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a gold mine, and Ellen was running it like a silent auction for her inner circle. Now I understood the real problem. Refusing to pay that $500 fine wasn't just about principle. It was about standing in the way of Ellen's system. And she was prepared to do whatever it took to make me bend or break. Elena wanted me to call the police about the bikers, but I knew how that would go. Mark Porter had friends on the force. The Ridge Riders hadn't technically committed a crime. They hadn't touched me, hadn't threatened me in so many words. All they'd done was show up, talk, and leave. That was the genius of Ellen's strategy. She never left fingerprints. But something else was happening in the neighborhood, something Ellen didn't see. People were talking. Word had spread about the bikers in my driveway. Tommy dropped by that morning, eyes wide. She sent them to you? Man, that's crossing a line. Sandra, the single mom who'd moved away, called me after hearing the news from an old neighbor. If you're smart, you'll just get out now, she warned. She doesn't stop. But I wasn't planning on leaving. Ellen thought she'd cornered me, but she'd just made the one mistake she couldn't take back. She'd made it personal. I didn't know exactly what my next move was, but I knew this. If I was going to survive this war, I'd need more than stubbornness. I'd need proof, allies, and a way to hit Ellen where it hurt the most. Because this wasn't about a truck anymore. This was about showing the entire neighborhood that fear only works if you let it. The next morning, I stood at the window with a cup of coffee, waiting. The Ridge Riders didn't come back, at least, not yet, but something had changed overnight. People weren't just looking at my house anymore, they were avoiding it. Across the street, Mrs. Holloway, 67, who'd always waved when she watered her garden, turned away the moment our eyes met. The Johnson kids, who used to cut across my yard on their bikes, now swerved to the other side of the road. It was subtle, but it was there, distance. Fear. The kind of quiet isolation that tells you someone's been talking behind closed doors. And I knew exactly who. By noon, the first anonymous letter arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA. No letterhead, no signature, just a sheet of paper with blocky, computer-printed text. We all want peace here. Stop causing trouble before it gets worse. There was no return address. Elena found me reading it at the kitchen counter. She didn't speak. She just slid the letter into the trash. But 2 hours later, another one came. And another the next day. The message was clear. You're alone in this. That evening, I went to the neighborhood market. On the way out, I ran into George Miller, 55, who'd lived here longer than anyone. He leaned in close and whispered, "They're telling folks you threatened Ellen at the last board meeting. Said you cursed her out in front of everyone." "That's a lie," I said. "I know," George replied. "But around here, lies travel faster than truth." It wasn't just gossip. Things started happening. On Tuesday, our trash bin disappeared. I found it 2 blocks away, dumped on its side, garbage scattered. Wednesday morning, someone egged my truck, 3 bright yellow splatters across the hood. By Thursday, even Tommy was nervous about being seen with me. He called instead of stopping by. "Man, I've got kids," he said quietly. "I can't get on Ellen's bad side right now." "I'm sorry." The worst part? It was working. Elena's anxiety was getting worse. She jumped every time a motorcycle passed, even if it wasn't the Ridge Riders. She started keeping the curtains closed all day. Friday night, we got a letter from the HOA. Not a fine this time, but a notice of community review. They wanted to evaluate the condition of our property. That was their code for we're coming in to look for violations. And they weren't subtle about the timing. Monday, 8 a.m. sharp. Elena read it twice, then set it down. "David, what are they looking for?" "Anything," I said. "Anything they can twist into a violation." That weekend, I decided to walk the neighborhood, see who was still willing to talk to me. It was worse than I thought. Some people pretended not to hear me when I said hello. Others gave quick, polite smiles, but stepped back like I was contagious. The only ones who spoke freely were the ones already on the HOA's bad side. A man named Luis Vega, 46, told me they'd fined him $200 for improper roof color after he replaced a few shingles. "They do it to push you until you sell," he said bitterly. "Then one of their people buys your place cheap." A young couple, Rena and Joseph Kim, 31 and 33, told me they'd gotten a noise violation for their toddler crying at night. "We thought moving here meant safety," Rena said, "but it's like living under surveillance." By Sunday night, I realized the bigger picture. It wasn't just me. The entire neighborhood was trapped in a cycle of control and intimidation. The rules weren't protecting property values. They were protecting the board's power. And anyone who challenged that power was slowly erased, one way or another. Monday came. At exactly 8 a.m., a white HOA-marked SUV pulled into my driveway. Ellen Porter got out, clipboard in hand, flanked by Rick Daly, 48, the HOA's compliance officer. Ellen's smile was thin and practiced. "David," she said sweetly, "we're just here to ensure everything is in order." I didn't move from the porch. "You mean you're here to find something wrong?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she smoothed her expression. "You seem tense. Perhaps it's because of recent events? Like sending bikers to my house?" I said. Rick chuckled under his breath, shaking his head like I was making it up. Bikers? That's quite a story, David. They walked the property, taking photos, making notes. I knew they'd find something, even if they had to invent it. That night, another notice arrived. Exterior structural violation, unapproved window shutters. Fine, $300. We'd had those shutters since the day we moved in. Elena broke that night. She sat at the kitchen table, hands in her hair, and said, "I can't keep living like this. I feel like we're in some kind of prison, David. And the guards are our neighbors." Her voice cracked. "Please, can we just pay them? Make it stop." I wanted to tell her yes. But I knew that if we paid now, it wouldn't end. It would only tell Ellen that her system worked. Still, watching Elena cry was harder than any fine or threat. And then, late Tuesday night, something happened that changed everything. I was locking up for the night when I saw movement at the end of the driveway. It was George Miller. He waved me over, glancing up and down the street before speaking. "I've been keeping something," he whispered, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "It's time you saw it." Inside were copies of HOA meeting minutes. Real ones, not the sanitized versions they posted publicly. They detailed discussions about strategic enforcement and targeted compliance measures against specific residents. My name was on the list. So were Tommy's, Sandra's, Luis's, and the Kims. It wasn't paranoia. It was policy. As I stood there in the cold, holding proof in my hands, I realized the consequences had gone beyond fines and intimidation. This was organized, deliberate. And if I didn't fight back now, I wouldn't just lose my home. I'd lose the part of myself that refused to be bullied into silence. I sat at the kitchen table long after Elena went to bed, George's envelopes spread out in front of me like evidence in a courtroom. Each page was worse than the last. Casual notes about targeting residents, references to cooperative buyers, waiting for foreclosed properties, and even a section marked confidential that discussed leveraging non-HOA channels to encourage compliance. That was corporate speak for intimidation. They weren't just running a neighborhood association. They were running a racket. By dawn, my decision was made. If Ellen wanted a war, she'd get one. But I wasn't going to fight it on her terms. The first step was finding people who still had the spine to stand up to her. I started with Tommy. At first, he resisted. "David, man, I've got kids. I can't be part of this." I slid one of the meeting pages across his garage workbench. His eyes scanned the line where his own name appeared. Persistent violation potential. Consider targeted compliance escalation. He looked up at me, pale. That's my family they're talking about." "Exactly," I said. "This isn't about a truck or shutters or grass length. It's about power. And if we don't push back now, none of us are safe." By the end of the conversation, Tommy agreed to help, quietly, for now. Next was Luis Vega. When I showed him the documents, he didn't even hesitate. "I've been waiting for someone to do something about these vultures. Count me in." The Kims took more convincing, especially with Rena's fear of retaliation. But Joseph clenched his jaw and said, "If they're already targeting us, we might as well make it count." By the end of the week, we had 6 people ready to move. Me, Tommy, Luis, the Kims, George, and Nina Patel, 29. A new homeowner, Ellen, had already hit with a $400 landscaping noncompliance fine. Step 2 was gathering more evidence. George had given us the spark, but we needed flames, enough to burn through Ellen's denials when the time came. Tommy installed discrete cameras on his property, angled to catch activity on my driveway and his. Luis started attending HOA meetings, not to speak, but to record. The Kims combed through old newsletters, finding contradictions between official rules and the board's actions. Nina, who worked in real estate, dug into property records. What she found made my stomach turn. 3 foreclosed homes in the past 2 years had been resold to relatives or business associates of board members, at prices far below market value. We met in secret, rotating houses so we wouldn't draw attention. Elena, still scared, didn't fully approve, but she didn't stop me either. I think she knew this was the only way I'd ever feel safe here again. But fighting the HOA wasn't just about paperwork. We had to deal with the Ridge Riders. That meant confronting Mark Porter. One evening, I walked into Iron Horse Tavern, the kind of place where the walls smell like beer and motor oil. Mark was at the bar with 2 of his crew, laughing loud enough to drown out the jukebox. When he saw me, his smile froze. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Noncompliance." I walked right up to him. Tell Ellen to keep you out of this. You want to play biker games, fine, but you come near my wife again, and you'll regret it. The room went quiet. One of his guys shifted like he was ready to stand up, but Mark raised a hand. He leaned close, his breath hot with whiskey. You think you're the first guy to try and stand up to her? You'll be gone before the year's out. I smiled, because I'd been waiting for him to say something like that. I had a recorder in my pocket. That night, I uploaded the audio to 3 different cloud accounts. Insurance. By the 3rd week, our group had enough to paint a clear picture. Proof of targeted enforcement from the meeting minutes. Video of board members trespassing without notice. Property records tying foreclosures to insiders. Audio of Mark Porter making an implied threat. Now came the question, what to do with it? Luis suggested going to the police, but I didn't trust the local force, not with Mark's connections. Nina proposed a state-level housing authority complaint, but those could take months, even years. It was George who had the most dangerous idea. Public, he said simply. Make it impossible for them to bury it. We decided to go nuclear. At the next HOA board meeting, one Ellen expected me to skip. I walked in with our entire group. Every seat in the small community hall was filled. Neighbors turned to watch us, whispering. Ellen's eyes narrowed. David, I didn't think you'd be joining us tonight. I didn't sit. I placed a thick folder on the table in front of her. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say before we begin. Her smile was tight. If you have a grievance, you can file. I cut her off. This isn't a grievance. This is evidence. And then, one by one, I laid it out. The meeting minutes, the property records, the surveillance footage, and finally, the audio of Mark Porter's threat, played loud enough for the entire room to hear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ellen tried to regain control. This is an ambush. None of this proves. Save it, George said from the back. We're done living under your thumb. Others started speaking up. Neighbors I didn't even know had problems with the board. Complaints poured out. Unfair fines, harassment, selective enforcement. Ellen's composure cracked. Her voice rose. Her words stumbled. Mark Porter, standing in the back, looked like he wanted to punch something. By the time the meeting ended, half the neighborhood was demanding a recall vote for the entire board. Ellen stormed out without another word. We knew she wouldn't go quietly. People like her never do. But for the first time, the balance had shifted. She wasn't untouchable anymore. That night, Elena hugged me for the first time in weeks without tension in her shoulders. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I didn't feel victorious yet. Not until Ellen was gone would I believe we'd truly won. But for the first time since this began, I could see a way forward. The recall vote was set for 3 weeks after the board meeting, but I knew Ellen wouldn't wait that long to retaliate. Sure enough, the very next morning, we got a final notice from the HOA. Due to repeated violations and hostile conduct toward the association, we are initiating legal proceedings to place a lien on your property. It was a desperate move, one meant to scare us into folding before the vote. But this time, fear didn't work. Not on me. Not anymore. Our group had grown. After the meeting, more neighbors came forward with their own stories. The Williams family had been fined for improper curtain color. The Ramirez household had received daily noise complaints despite being out of town. Even Mrs. Holloway, the one who'd stopped waving at me, showed up at my door with a folder of old violation notices she'd been too scared to fight. By the end of the week, we had over 20 households committed to voting Ellen and her board out. And that's when I realized something important. This was never really about me. It was about an entire community waking up to the truth. Power only works when it's one-sided. But Ellen wasn't going down without a fight. On the Friday before the recall vote, a storm hit, both literally and figuratively. The weather was ugly, sheets of rain slamming against the windows. And then, just after dark, the Ridge Riders came back. I heard the engines before I saw them. 3 motorcycles pulling into my driveway, headlights cutting through the downpour. Elena froze beside me, her hands gripping my arm. This time, I didn't call the police. I didn't even step outside. Instead, I opened the blinds just enough for them to see me holding my phone, already recording. Scarface, their leader, got off his bike, walked up to the porch, and shouted over the rain. You think this is over? You think you can embarrass her like that? I didn't answer. I just kept the camera trained on him. That's when he made his mistake. He stepped onto the porch, dripping wet, and jabbed a finger toward Elena. Next time, we won't just talk. Those words were gold. Clear, direct, enough to cross every legal line. I ended the recording, called my lawyer, and sent the video to 3 different news outlets. By morning, it was already online. The effect was instant. Neighbors who'd been on the fence about the recall now saw exactly what Ellen was capable of. Even some of her loyalists couldn't defend her anymore. When recall day came, the community hall was packed. The vote wasn't close. Ellen and the entire board were removed in a landslide. She tried to fight it, threatening lawsuits, but the new board immediately suspended all pending fines and voided any liens she'd filed. They also voted to report her actions and the Ridge Riders' intimidation to state authorities. 2 weeks later, I heard that Ellen had quietly sold her house and left Maple Grove Estates. The Ridge Riders stopped showing up, too. I figured Mark Porter knew the heat was on. Life in the neighborhood began to feel normal again. People started waving when they passed. The Johnson kids were back to cutting across the yard. Elena finally opened the curtains during the day. It wasn't perfect. HOAs never really disappear, even with new leadership, but the fear was gone. And that made all the difference. One night, as Elena and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she asked, "Do you think it was worth it?" I thought about all the sleepless nights, the tension in our home, the risk we'd taken. I thought about George handing me that envelope, about Tommy's fear for his kids, about the Kims wondering if they'd made a mistake moving here. And I thought about the moment Scarface stepped onto my porch in the rain, thinking he could scare me into silence, and how, instead, he'd handed me the very weapon I needed to end it. "Yeah," I said finally. "It was worth it." The truth is, I didn't just win against Ellen. I learned something about myself, something I think we all know deep down but try to ignore. If you let fear dictate your life, you've already lost. But if you stand up, even when you're outnumbered, even when you're scared, you give other people permission to do the same. And sometimes, that's all it takes to turn the tide. A few days later, George stopped by with a 6-pack. We sat in the driveway, sipping beers, watching the neighborhood kids play. "You know," he said, "Ellen's going to tell her version of this story wherever she ends up." "Let her," I replied. "The truth's already out here." As the sun dipped below the houses, I caught sight of the Ridge Riders' old route down the main road. It was quiet now, just the hum of crickets and the occasional car. I realized I didn't flinch anymore when I heard an engine. And that's when it really hit me. The HOA thought they could take away my peace. But peace isn't something you give them permission to control. It's something you fight for. And once you've earned it, nobody can touch it.